There's a certain sound that gets burned into your memory when you've been married long enough. The click of your front door unlocking at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night isn't one of those sounds. I was lying in bed, not really asleep but not fully awake either. You know the feeling? That hazy space where you're just floating, waiting for the world to get quiet so you can finally shut your brain off. But then I heard it click, and the front door creaked open. My first thought wasn't panic. It wasn't even suspicion. We live in a safe neighborhood, no break-ins, nothing like that. My mind went to Emily. My wife. I thought maybe she was having trouble with the lock, maybe she went out for something. But at 3 in the damn morning? She hadn't mentioned any late-night plans when she went to bed early after dinner. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, listening. The front door closed softly, and then I heard quiet footsteps. The floorboards in the hallway always creak in the same spot near the stairs, but these footsteps were cautious, like someone trying to avoid that exact creak. I wasn't scared, though. I was too confused to be scared. A minute passed, then 2. Nothing. No lights. No more footsteps. I decided to get up, quietly. I wanted to catch her in the act of whatever she was doing, though I didn't really know what act I was expecting to find. Maybe she'd snuck out for some air or a walk, something innocent. Maybe she didn't want to wake me. But I wasn't buying it. You don't leave your house in the middle of the night and come back sneaking around unless you're up to something. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and crept toward the stairs. The house was dead quiet, except for the faint rustling of fabric. I peered over the banister, and that's when I saw it, Emily, still in her work clothes, standing by the kitchen island with her back to me. The light from the fridge illuminated her enough that I could see she wasn't alone. There was a man standing next to her. They weren't touching, but they were close enough that I didn't need to guess what was going on. My chest tightened, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. I felt my hands clench involuntarily, the nails digging into my palms. Now, I could have stormed down there, demanded answers, flipped the kitchen table over, done all the things a guy is supposed to do when he catches his wife with someone else in his own home, right under his nose. But instead, I just stood there. Watching. Listening. The guy leaned in closer, whispered something to her, and she smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in months. Not the fake one she gave me before bed. This was something else. Real. Intimate. That smile felt like a knife. I stood there frozen, gripping the banister like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My mind started racing, trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Emily. My wife. With another man. In our kitchen. At 3 a.m. What the hell was going on? They weren't touching yet, but they might as well have been, with how close they were standing. His hand brushed against her arm, just lightly, like a test, and she didn't pull away. My stomach turned. It was like watching something in slow motion, and I wanted to snap out of it, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away. Who the hell was he? That was my first real thought after the shock settled in. He wasn't a friend. I would have recognized him. This wasn't some old buddy stopping by, and it sure as hell wasn't a work thing. He didn't look like a guy there to talk about client reports or office politics. The guy was younger. Maybe late 20s, early 30s. He had that casual arrogance about him, like he was comfortable in my house, like this wasn't his first time sneaking around. He was dressed in a dark jacket, jeans, and those kind of expensive sneakers that people who try too hard wear. Emily always liked well-dressed men. I guess I never paid attention to what that might have meant over the years. He leaned in closer to her, whispering something again. She laughed softly, like she was trying to keep the noise down but still wanted to let him know she found whatever the hell he said funny. That laugh hit me harder than I expected. She hadn't laughed like that with me in a long time. Not like that. Not genuinely. It was like I was watching a side of her that I didn't even recognize anymore. And there I was, standing in the shadows, a spectator in my own marriage. I forced myself to breathe, slowly, trying to keep my thoughts together. What the hell was I supposed to do now? My mind started throwing ideas at me: confront them, throw the guy out, demand answers, but I wasn't ready. I needed to know more. Maybe it was the shock, maybe it was something else, but I knew one thing: I didn't want to charge in blind. I needed to be sure of what I was dealing with. So I waited. I watched. He was getting bolder, inching closer, his hand brushing hers again. She didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head toward him, almost inviting him in. My chest tightened again, but I held my ground, my jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I wasn't going to blow up, not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to see where this was going. Emily finally spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't be here this late," she said, but there was no real conviction behind her words. It was more of a suggestion than a command. She wasn't telling him to leave. Hell, she wasn't even asking him to leave. If anything, she was just acknowledging that this was risky, him being there, me potentially waking up. He leaned in, his hands sliding onto her waist now. "I couldn't help it," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "I wanted to see you." Emily bit her lip, and that was when I knew. This wasn't some harmless late-night visit. This wasn't an innocent conversation that just happened to be taking place in my kitchen while I slept upstairs like a fool. They were comfortable with each other. Too comfortable. My heart was pounding in my chest now, but my mind was clear. Crystal clear. Emily was having an affair. She was cheating on me, right under my nose, and had the audacity to bring the guy into our home. Into the same space where we raised our kids, where we had family dinners, where I thought our life together was solid. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run down the stairs and tear this guy apart. I wanted to grab her, shake her, demand to know why the hell she was doing this to us, to me, to our family. But instead, I took a deep breath and stepped back, moving slowly, quietly, back toward the bedroom. I didn't know how long this had been going on. I didn't know how deep it went. But I knew I wasn't going to act on emotion right now. Not yet. That wasn't going to help. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that you don't go into a fight without knowing the full story. So I turned and went back upstairs, leaving them down there in the dark. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. My hands were shaking, and I clenched them into fists to steady myself. My mind raced with a million questions, but one kept rising to the top: how long has this been going on? Had it started recently? Or was this something that had been going on for months, maybe even longer? Had I been blind to this all along? The late nights, the work trips, the time she said she was out with friends but came back smelling like someone else's cologne, had I missed all the signs? Or had I just chosen to ignore them, convincing myself that everything was fine? I looked at the clock. It was 3:17 a.m. I had to get my thoughts together. I wasn't going to lose it. Not yet. Tomorrow was a new day, and I had to figure out what the hell to do. But for now, I needed more information. I wasn't going to just storm down there without a plan. I had to know how deep this ran, who this guy was, and how long she'd been screwing me over behind my back. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing. Sleep wasn't coming anytime soon, but I didn't care. I was beyond tired, beyond shocked. I was on the edge of something I couldn't come back from, and I knew it. Everything in my life, everything I thought I had, was crumbling. When I heard the front door open again an hour later, I listened as the guy left quietly. Emily came upstairs a few minutes after, moving softly like she didn't want to wake me. She slipped into bed beside me without a word. I felt her body next to mine, her breathing slow, steady, like nothing had happened. Like our world hadn't just been blown apart. I stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night, wide awake. There was no going back from this. No pretending everything was okay. I was going to find out the truth, and when I did, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. But one thing was certain: Emily had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I went through the motions. I got up early, made breakfast for the kids, and saw them off to school like I always did. Emily acted normal, kissed me on the cheek before she left for work. I pretended everything was fine, but my mind was miles away. I needed answers. I needed to know what was really happening, how far this had gone, and just how much of a fool I'd been played for. So that afternoon, I took off work early. I drove down to her office, parked in the lot across the street, and waited. I sat there, engine idling in the parking lot across from her office, watching the building's entrance like I was some kind of undercover cop. My head was spinning, replaying every single moment from the night before. Emily sneaking in, that guy in our house, the way she smiled at him. It felt like I was drowning in it. But at the same time, something else was kicking in, something I hadn't felt before: clarity. I wasn't going to play the victim here. I wasn't going to sit around and let her screw me over while pretending everything was fine. If she wanted to blow up our marriage, then fine. But I wasn't going to be the last to know. After about 20 minutes of waiting, I saw her walk out. It was mid-afternoon, and there she was, my wife of 8 years, strolling out of her office like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked good, too good. Hair done, dressed up nicer than she needed to be for a regular workday, not like someone who had been working in front of a computer all day. She had that look people get when they're excited about something, or someone. I watched as she glanced down at her phone, tapping out a message, then looked up, scanning the parking lot. My stomach twisted, wondering if she was looking for him. The guy from last night. Would he pull up any second, pick her up for another round of whatever they had going on? But no one came. After a moment, she headed toward her car, alone. I waited a few minutes, letting her get a head start before I followed. The drive felt like hours, even though I kept a good distance. She wasn't going straight home, that much was clear. My mind ran wild with every possible scenario. Was she meeting him? Were they going to a hotel? The thought of her being with him again made me sick, but I needed to see it for myself. I wasn't going to confront her based on some assumptions. I needed proof. We finally pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe. I parked a few spots away, far enough that she wouldn't notice me but close enough to keep an eye on her. She went inside, her phone still glued to her hand. I waited. My heart was pounding, my pulse in my ears, but I kept my cool. About 5 minutes later, a car pulled in, his car. The same guy from last night. He parked right next to her, like they'd done this 100 times before. He got out, all casual, and walked inside. I watched him disappear through the door and felt a surge of anger rising inside me. This was it. I wasn't going to sit here like an idiot while my wife met up with some other guy. I got out of the car, took a deep breath, and headed straight for the door. The cafe was small, quiet, the kind of place where people go to have a casual coffee, not to meet their affair partner. I spotted them right away, sitting in a corner booth, heads close together, laughing about something. She looked different with him, more relaxed, more, I don't know, happy. It was like I didn't even recognize the woman sitting there with him. I wasn't going to make a scene, not here. But I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see this either. I walked right up to the table, my eyes locked on them the whole time. Emily didn't notice me at first. She was too focused on whatever this guy was saying, too wrapped up in her own little world. When I finally got to the table, I stood there for a second, just looking at them. Emily glanced up and froze. Her smile dropped, and her face went pale. The guy looked confused for a second, probably wondering who the hell I was. Then it clicked. He looked between us, his mouth half open, like he was about to say something but couldn't find the words. "Hey, Emily," I said, my voice calm, steady. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't losing my cool. But inside, I was boiling. "Mind introducing me to your friend?" She didn't answer right away. Her mouth opened like she was going to say something, but nothing came out. The guy shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. He didn't have the same arrogant look he had last night. Now, he just looked like some scared kid caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. I didn't give her time to come up with some bullshit excuse. I wasn't here for that. I leaned in a little, my eyes never leaving hers. How long has this been going on? She blinked, her mouth still hanging open. Josh, it's not what you think. Not what I think. I scoffed, glancing at the guy sitting across from her. You've got a hell of a way of showing that. The guy, who I still didn't have a name for, finally found his voice. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I ignored him. He wasn't who I was here for. My eyes were still on her, waiting for her to explain herself. Waiting for her to tell me why the hell she'd been sneaking around behind my back, bringing this guy into our home, into our life. Emily swallowed hard, trying to gather herself. It's not like that, she stammered. We were just. Don't you dare tell me this is innocent, I cut her off. I saw you too. Last night. In our house. You really expect me to believe you're just friends? She looked like she was about to cry, but I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. Not after what I saw. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It just happened. That's not an answer, I said, my voice rising now. How long has it been going on? Weeks? Months? She wiped at her eyes, still trying to play the victim. Josh, I swear, it's not what you think. I slammed my hand on the table, making both of them jump. Stop lying to me. I hissed, my voice low but full of anger. Just tell me the truth. Right now. The guy started to stand up, probably thinking he needed to defend her, but I shot him a look that froze him in place. You, I said, pointing at him. Sit down. He did as he was told, his eyes wide. He wasn't going to be the hero today. Emily finally broke down, her voice trembling. It's been a few months, she admitted. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. I stared at her, my mind reeling. A few months? How the hell had I missed this? How had I not seen what was right in front of me? So you just decided to screw around with this guy and hope I'd never find out? Is that it? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. No, Josh, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. You're hurting me now, I said, my voice cold. You've been hurting me for months. And for what? Because you were bored? Because you needed something new? She sobbed, her hands covering her face. The guy just sat there, staring at the table, like he wished he could disappear. I was done. I didn't need to hear any more. I'd heard enough to know what kind of person I'd been married to all these years. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving them both sitting there in the wreckage of what they'd done. The drive home was a blur. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I didn't feel anything. Not yet. Numbness had taken over, replacing the rage that had driven me to confront her. I'd gotten the answers I needed, but they didn't make me feel any better. They just made everything worse. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a long time, staring at the house. Our house. The place where we built our life, our family. And now, all I could see were the lies, the betrayal. Everything felt tainted, like a film of filth had settled over it, and no amount of scrubbing would ever get it clean. Eventually, I went inside. The house was empty, quiet. The kids were still at school, and Emily wasn't back yet. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at all the little things that made up our life together. Photos on the walls, the kids' toys scattered across the floor, the blanket she always wrapped herself in while watching TV. All of it felt wrong now. Twisted. Like it belonged to someone else. I sat down on the couch, put my head in my hands, and finally let it sink in. This was real. This was happening. My wife had been cheating on me, and there was no going back from that. No fixing it. No pretending it didn't happen. She had destroyed everything, and now I had to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I sat in that silence for what felt like hours, replaying every moment of our life together in my head. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen the signs? But that didn't matter now. What mattered was what I was going to do next. And I wasn't about to just sit there and let her destroy everything I'd built without facing the consequences. I got up and started pacing around the house, each step fueling the anger I could feel bubbling just beneath the surface. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by something darker, something more deliberate. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to wallow in self-pity. No. I wanted her to feel it. The betrayal, the hurt, the shame. She wasn't going to get away with this. Not after what she'd done. But I wasn't going to lose my mind and do something reckless. That's what she would expect, me throwing a fit, packing my bags, storming out like some kind of defeated husband. No, I had a better idea. Something that would hit her harder than any words I could throw at her. I went into the office, the room where I kept all our important documents, financial records, and files. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the manila folder I'd been keeping for emergencies. Inside were copies of our insurance policies, wills, the deed to the house, and most importantly, our joint financial statements. She had no idea I had been quietly managing our finances for years, making sure everything was in order. She just assumed I handled it because I always had. Emily didn't even know the full scope of what we owned, what we were worth. But I did. And I was about to make sure she paid for every single second of betrayal. I logged into our joint bank accounts and began transferring the funds. Not all of it, of course. I wasn't stupid. I didn't want her to catch on right away. But I moved enough, just small amounts at first, to my personal account. Money she wouldn't notice was gone for a while. By the time she figured it out, it would be too late. I had been careful for years, setting up my own accounts, investments she didn't even know existed. I knew how to cover my tracks. And this time, I was going to bleed her dry, little by little. She was about to find out what it felt like to lose control. Next, I opened up my email and drafted a message to our lawyer. Not hers, mine. I didn't give a damn what she had planned for a divorce or if she thought she'd get half of everything. I was ahead of her. The message was short and to the point: initiate proceedings immediately. Full custody and alimony control. I attached the files, proof of her infidelity, the financial records showing that I had been the primary breadwinner, and a list of assets she wouldn't even know how to fight for. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't just going to hit her with legal action. That would take time, and she wouldn't feel the full impact right away. No, I needed something more immediate. Something that would knock her down from that smug pedestal she'd put herself on. I needed her to know that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I logged into our shared cloud drive, the one where we kept all our photos, family videos, and personal files. I knew she had a backup there too, a private folder she thought I didn't know about. It was password protected, but I'd figured out her password a long time ago. That's the thing about cheating, it makes you sloppy. People get comfortable, think they're invincible. They forget that they're leaving a trail. I found the folder easily. Inside, there were pictures, texts, and emails between her and him. Some of it was mundane, flirty messages, pictures of them together in places I didn't recognize. But then I found the explicit stuff. Pictures that made my stomach turn, conversations that made me feel like I'd been punched in the gut all over again. She was sharing parts of herself with him that I thought were mine. Good. This was exactly what I needed. I compiled the worst of it into a neat little package. A collection of her lies, her betrayals. Then I sent it to a list of people, her family, her friends, her boss. Every single person she had lied to, every single person who thought she was the perfect wife, the perfect friend. They were about to see who she really was. I attached a note at the end, nothing dramatic, just, "This is who you've been supporting." Once I hit send, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. She wasn't going to slink back into her life, pretending everything was fine, pretending I didn't know. I was going to burn it all down. And I wasn't even done yet. I opened her personal email next, the one she used for work. She had a big project coming up, a presentation for a new client that she'd been working on for weeks. Something that could potentially land her a promotion. I forwarded her private messages with her affair partner to her entire work team. I made sure it included the most damning conversations, the ones that made it clear she wasn't just cheating on me, she was neglecting her work responsibilities to meet up with him during office hours. She wanted to play games? Fine. But I was going to win. By the time I was done, I felt a strange kind of calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was just done. Done with her lies, done with the fake smiles, the pretending that we still had something real. She had destroyed that the moment she let him into our house. The moment she thought she could live two lives and get away with it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, and realized that this was just the beginning. I wasn't done tearing her life apart. I was just getting started. The next few days were a blur of activity. I was methodical, careful, making sure every piece of the puzzle fell into place. I started moving my personal belongings out of the house, piece by piece, while she was at work. I didn't want her to notice right away, so I kept it subtle. Clothes, important documents, some of my more expensive personal items. I rented a storage unit under a fake name and stashed everything there, away from her prying eyes. In the evenings, we continued our charade of a normal life. She didn't suspect anything yet, but I could see the tension building in her. I knew she was expecting me to blow up at some point, to have some big confrontation about what I'd seen. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. I kept my distance, played it cool, acted like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She just didn't know it yet. Then, on Friday, it happened. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to watch TV, when I heard her phone buzz. She was in the kitchen, making dinner, so I glanced at the screen. It was a text from her boss. Just a single word, "Why?" I smiled. The bomb had dropped. A few minutes later, I heard her phone buzz again. And again. And again. Each time, she ignored it, focused on cooking. But I knew it was only a matter of time before she checked her messages. I waited, pretending not to notice as her phone buzzed a few more times. Finally, she picked it up. Her face went pale the second she read the first message. I watched her eyes widen in horror as she scrolled through the texts, the emails, the photos that were flooding in. She looked up at me, her mouth opening to say something, but I just stared back at her, waiting. What did you do?" she finally whispered. I shrugged. What I had to. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there, staring at her phone like it was some kind of bomb that had just gone off in her hands. I could see the panic in her eyes, the fear, the realization that her life was crumbling around her. Good. Let her feel it. You sent those to my boss?" "To my family," she stammered, her voice shaking. I nodded, standing up from the couch and walking toward her. "You didn't think I'd just let you get away with it, did you?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "Josh, I'm sorry, I never meant for this to happen. I love you." I laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Love me? You love me? You've been screwing around behind my back for months, and you're standing here telling me you love me?" She reached out, trying to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "Josh, please. It wasn't like that." I shook my head, stepping back. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to play the victim. You made your choices, and now you're going to live with the consequences." She was sobbing now, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. "Please, Josh. We can fix this. We can make this right." I stared at her for a long moment, watching as the reality of what she had done sank in. And then, finally, I said the words I had been waiting to say for days. "It's over, Emily. I'm done." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her behind to pick up the pieces of the life she had destroyed. The drive away from the house felt surreal. It was the first time I had walked out without looking back, without that gut feeling of regret or the weight of what-ifs holding me down. The house wasn't my home anymore. It was just a place filled with lies, with memories that had been tainted beyond repair. It didn't matter where I was headed, I just needed to get away from her. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Not completely. As much as I destroyed her life in those last few days, as satisfying as it was to see her crumble, there was still one thing left to do: face her one last time. No more games, no more pretending. I needed closure, even if she didn't deserve it. I pulled over to the side of the road a few miles out, parked, and just sat there for a while. My head was buzzing, thoughts crashing into each other, but I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the same way. There was a strange calm settling over me, like the eye of a storm. The worst had passed, and now there was only the wreckage left to deal with. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found her name, Emily. I stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering over the call button. I could just leave it like this, walk away and never speak to her again. But that wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of person who left things unfinished. I needed to see her one last time, to have a real conversation about what had happened, and to figure out how to move forward, even if it was just for the sake of the kids. So, I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring, her voice a shaky mess of tears and panic. Josh? Josh, where are you? Please, I'll be home in an hour, I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Face to face. There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear her breathing, trying to hold herself together. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll be here. I hung up without another word and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I wasn't going to let her turn this into some long-winded emotional plea. We'd both said enough already, and I didn't need to hear more excuses. But I needed to hear her admit it, say it out loud with no more hiding behind tears or half-hearted apologies. When I pulled back into the driveway, the house looked the same as always, but everything felt different. I got out of the car and walked up to the front door, my steps slow and deliberate. The same door I'd walked through 1,000 times before, but now it felt like I was entering enemy territory. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, and for a second, I wondered if she'd run off. Part of me almost hoped she had. But then I saw her, sitting on the couch in the living room, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me when I walked in, but didn't say anything. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of her. She looked so small, so broken. The woman I'd shared my life with for years, the mother of my children, reduced to this. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered why we were here. I walked over to the chair across from her and sat down, keeping my distance. I wasn't about to sit next to her, not after everything that had happened. There was a silence between us, thick and uncomfortable. She kept looking at me, waiting for me to speak, but I wasn't going to give her that. I wanted her to start. I wanted her to be the one who had to face it head on. Finally, after what felt like forever, she broke the silence. Josh, Her voice cracked, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, waiting. She shifted in her seat, her hands twisting in her lap. I know you hate me right now, and I don't blame you. I hate myself too. I never wanted this to happen, I swear. I don't even know why I let it get this far. Why did you? I asked, my voice steady. I want to know, Emily. I need to know. She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears again. It wasn't. I don't know. It started out small. Harmless, you know? We were just talking at work, and then we started texting, and it just snowballed from there. I clenched my jaw, feeling the anger creeping back in. Harmless? You were sneaking him into our house. You were meeting him behind my back for months. That's not harmless, Emily. She flinched at my words, but I didn't let up. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice cold. Was he worth everything you threw away? Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. No, Josh. No, he wasn't. It wasn't about him. It was never about him. Then what the hell was it about? I demanded, leaning forward. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just wanted something else. Something that wasn't me. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and regret. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know why I did it. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear. I felt lost. Like I wasn't enough anymore. Like we weren't enough. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't show it. I wasn't going to let her see me break. You weren't enough? I repeated, shaking my head. We have a life together, Emily. We have kids. A home. How the hell could you say that wasn't enough? She wiped her eyes again, trying to pull herself together. I know we had all of that. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I didn't feel like me anymore. I felt like I was just coasting. Like everything we had wasn't mine anymore, like it belonged to someone else. I don't even know how to explain it. I leaned back in the chair, letting her words sink in. Part of me wanted to understand, to figure out what had gone wrong, but the other part of me didn't give a damn. I didn't care about her reasons. I didn't care about her self-pity. She had made her choices, and now we were here. So that's it? I said, my voice low. You felt lost, so you decided to blow up our entire life? That's your excuse? She shook her head frantically. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, or the kids. I didn't think it would get this far. But it did, I shot back. You let it happen. You let it get this far. She was quiet for a long time, her shoulders shaking as she tried to stifle her sobs. I watched her, feeling nothing. I was numb. I was past the point of feeling sorry for her. I know I can't take it back, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I screwed everything up, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But please, Josh, don't give up on us. Don't give up on what we had. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. There was a time when I would have said yes, when I would have fought to keep everything together. But that time had passed. Whatever we had, it was gone now. She had killed it. I already have, I said, my voice steady and final. Her face crumpled again, and she reached out, but I didn't move. I wasn't going to let her pull me back in. It's over, Emily, I said, standing up from the chair. There's no coming back from this. You made your choices, and now you're going to have to live with them. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Josh, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. No, I said, cutting her off. I'm not going to counseling. I'm not going to pretend like everything's okay, or like this was just some mistake we can work through. You destroyed us. You destroyed our family. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. Done with the lies, the excuses, the fake tears. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I'll file for divorce tomorrow, I said, my voice cold and final. You can stay here with the kids until we figure out the details, but I'm leaving. I'll be moving my things out over the next few days. She shook her head, her hands gripping the edge of the couch. Josh, please, don't do this. Don't leave me. I looked at her one last time, and for a moment, I almost felt something. But then I remembered everything she had done, and that feeling disappeared. Goodbye, Emily. And with that, I turned and walked out of the house, the door closing behind me with a finality that left no room for second chances. As I left the house that day, I expected to feel relief, maybe even a sense of closure. But the truth is, walking away didn't feel like some grand moment of freedom. It wasn't a victory lap. It was just the end of something that had already been rotting from the inside out. My footsteps echoed in the empty street as I made my way to the car, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, gripping the wheel, staring out at nothing. The anger had burned out by now, leaving me with something else. Not sadness. Not regret. It was more like a void, an emptiness where my life used to be. I had spent years building this life with Emily, and now that it was gone, I didn't really know who I was without it. I guess I thought I'd feel some sort of triumph after laying it all out, after finally ending things, but instead, I just felt hollow. It's funny, really. You spend so much time thinking about what you'll do if you're ever betrayed, imagining the anger, the revenge, the justice. But once it's over, there's no satisfaction in it. Nothing feels settled. All that's left is the mess, the wreckage of what used to be your life. But the kids, Hannah and Ethan, were still a reality I had to face. They were the only thing that kept me tethered to the ground. I knew I couldn't just disappear, couldn't cut myself off from everything. They were still my responsibility, and they deserved better than this. Better than the two of us tearing each other apart. I started the car and drove to the hotel I'd booked. It wasn't far from the house, just in case the kids needed me. I couldn't bring myself to go too far, not yet. Maybe that would come later, but for now, I needed to be close. The room was small and bare, but it was clean, and that was enough. I threw my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the blank wall in front of me. This was it. This was the new normal. The next day, I went back to the house to see the kids. They had been at school when everything went down, and I wanted to be the one to explain things. I wasn't going to let Emily spin some story or try to cover up what had happened. They deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as I could give them without dragging them through the mud. Hannah was the first to come home. She's 14 now, and I can already see the signs of her becoming a young adult. She's smart, sharp-witted, and fiercely protective of her little brother. Ethan, on the other hand, is still a kid. He's only 10, still full of energy and optimism, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. When they came through the door, they were surprised to see me there in the middle of the day. I could see the questions forming in Hannah's mind before she even opened her mouth. "Dad," she asked, her voice cautious. "Why are you here? Is everything okay?" I didn't want to lie to them, but I also didn't want to dump everything on them all at once. So, I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk, both of you. Let's sit down for a minute." They followed me to the couch, and I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for an explanation. I sat down, and they took their places on either side of me, just like we always did for family movie nights. But this wasn't going to be anything like that. "There's no easy way to say this," I began, looking at their faces, trying to figure out how to soften the blow. "Your mom and we've decided to separate." The room went still. Hannah's eyes widened, and she looked like she was trying to process what I'd just said. Ethan, on the other hand, looked confused, like he didn't quite understand. "What?" Hannah finally said, her voice cracking. "What do you mean separate? You're getting a divorce?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the words sink into the room. "Yeah, honey. We are." Ethan, still trying to make sense of it, tugged at my sleeve. "But why? Why can't you just stay? We can fix it, right?" His innocence nearly broke me. I'd been so focused on getting out, on making sure Emily faced the consequences of her actions, that I hadn't really thought about how it would feel to explain all of this to them. How do you tell your kids that their world is about to be ripped apart? I tried to keep it together, but my voice wavered. Sometimes grown-ups don't get along the way they used to. And when that happens, it's better for everyone if they live separately. It doesn't mean we don't love you guys. Your mom and I will always love you. But we can't live together anymore. Hannah sat there, her arms crossed tightly, her eyes brimming with tears that she refused to let fall. She wasn't a little girl anymore, and I could see the anger simmering just below the surface. She knew something wasn't right, that there was more to this than what I was saying. "Is this Mom's fault?" she asked bluntly, her voice filled with bitterness. I hesitated, not wanting to throw Emily completely under the bus, but I also wasn't going to lie. "It's complicated," I said carefully. "Your mom made some choices, and now we're here. But it's not just about blame, Hannah. It's about what's best for all of us moving forward." She shook her head, standing up abruptly. "No. I know what happened. I'm not stupid." Before I could respond, she stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. I winced at the sound but didn't go after her. She needed time. We all did. Ethan stayed behind, sitting next to me with a look of quiet confusion on his face. "Dad, are you mad at Mom?" he asked softly. I sighed, putting an arm around him. "I'm not mad at her, buddy. I'm just disappointed. But that doesn't change how much we love you and your sister. That's never going to change, okay?" He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. How could he? He was just a kid, caught in the middle of something he didn't ask for, something he couldn't control. Over the next few days, I moved the rest of my things out of the house. Emily stayed out of my way for the most part, though we had a few awkward exchanges here and there. She was still trying to hold on, still hoping I'd change my mind. But I knew there was no going back. Not after what had happened. One afternoon, as I was packing up the last of my clothes, she came into the bedroom, her face pale and drawn. "Josh, can we talk? Please?" I didn't stop what I was doing, but I nodded. "Go ahead." She sat down on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands together like she didn't know how to start. I don't know how we got here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you, or the kids." I glanced at her, feeling that familiar anger stir inside me again. "You did hurt us, Emily. You hurt all of us." She looked down at her hands, tears filling her eyes. I know I did. And I don't know how to fix it." "There is no fixing this," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "It's done. We're done." She nodded, wiping at her tears, but she didn't leave. Instead, she just sat there, watching me pack. "What are we going to tell the kids?" she asked after a long silence. "We tell them the truth," I said simply. "That we don't belong together anymore. That we're better off apart." She didn't respond, just nodded again, like she was too tired to fight anymore. And maybe she was. We both were. I zipped up the last suitcase and stood there for a moment, looking around the room. This had been our life for years, and now it was all falling apart. But I wasn't sad. Not really. I had already made my peace with it. "You're going to be okay, you know," I said, surprising even myself with how calm I sounded. "You'll figure it out." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "Will you?" I didn't answer. I didn't know the answer. All I knew was that I was ready to move on, to start over. Whatever that looked like, I'd figure it out. The last time I saw the house, it didn't feel like mine anymore. It was just a building, a place where things had happened, where lives had been changed. But it wasn't my home. Not anymore. I loaded the last of my things into the car and drove away without looking back. As I pulled onto the highway, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I wasn't happy. I wasn't relieved. But I wasn't broken either. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. And maybe that was enough. For now.